Okay, so I'm going to show you how to create an exploded axon diagram in Rhino and then export that into Illustrator. I'm also going to show you how to take that exploded axon, the model itself, export it into SketchUp, which also has some good diagramming tools in that as well. So we're going to look at 3 software packages: Rhino, SketchUp, and Illustrator for these drawings. So I have an exploded axonometric here. I'm going to move this up 40 feet. And so you'll notice with this model, originally this was imported from Revit. So a lot of the modeling we did was in Revit. A lot of the exterior perforated skin, this was done using Grasshopper for Rhino. So the idea behind this project is that the concept of the design is that the roof is this shell. It's this idea of the roof providing sun protection and reducing the solar heat gain in the house. And so it's not just a roof, it becomes this kind of shell structure that wraps and becomes the facade of the building out here as kind of a perforated facade. It also creates a porch that's shaded and all on the southern exposure. So that's the idea behind this. And all of the framing, so this is all steel framing, that model is also in here. So I have that as a layer. The whole house frame is on a layer that can be turned on and off. The framing was modeled using FrameCAD software, FrameCAD structure to model all of this, and so that was exported. So we have a separate file for that, and then the Revit file is kind of overlaid on top of it. So the Revit file is the walls, the furniture, the cabinetry, that's all coming in from Revit. And since we exported that as a CAD from Revit, all of these families have a different color and a different layer associated with them. So those can be turned off independently as well. But that's just the workflow working in this, going from Revit to Rhino. All right, so we're going to be talking about a lot of different software, but the point of all of this is to have a cohesive diagram and get our design intent across. Okay, so the idea here is show an exploded axonometric diagram, so similar to this view. Right now we're in perspective, but we'll change that soon. So what I've done is I've grouped all of the trusses. This project is modular, obviously, so the house breaks up into 8-foot wide modules, here, here, and here. And the 8-foot width is based on the Department of Transportation requirements because it has to be on a truck bed. So when it gets transported, you can't have anything wider than 8 feet. So that's why these trusses all actually break right here at the seam of each module, and each module has a beam, a parallelogram beam that spans these openings. So one beam, a beam next to it, and then another one, another 2 here. So that's those beams help us create these long span spaces, these big openings in the room. So that's what we have modeled here. Now originally this was down. I'm using the gumball to move these vertically. So originally this was 20 feet here. I've moved it up using the gumball. So 20 feet in the Z direction, which is the blue arrow. And again, if the gumball isn't turned on, make sure to turn it on down here. Make sure that's highlighted. So you can select, parts of your geometry, move them up. I like to do a save as whenever I'm doing an exploded axon diagram like this, because you're going to start moving parts of your building that you don't want to have to move back when you're continuing to work in Rhino. Okay, so I've pulled the roof up, and I use whole numbers. I pulled the roof up 40 feet, the roof trusses 20 feet. And I'm going to adjust this as I see fit when we're looking at the model and getting the view we want to see. But the idea here is to show that this roof is this shell and can be pulled off, and these trusses can be exposed, and we want to see a little bit of the interior of this house. So a view that could kind of achieve all of that is what we're looking for. So under the properties palette, you'll see that without clicking on anything, there's the projection method drop down here. So this is perspective. I'm going to change this to parallel. So now it's a parallel line drawing. So you'll notice there's no vanishing point. All the lines are parallel. You can switch back to perspective. You can go to 2-point perspective, which is very skewed. This is great for eye-level perspectives and other types of views that require architectural views. Architects often like 2-point perspective. Going back to this, so there's another command in Rhino called isometric. So if you type isometric, enter, and in this case it's the southeast view that we want to see. What we want to do here, the whole view is rotated here. Let me pause this, record. Okay, so we're in parallel. We're also going to use isometric. So I'm going to type isometric, go to the southeast view, and then zoom in. And so I can set this view under named views. And if that tab isn't there, you can right click over here, go to set view, and then you'll see named views here. So once that tab shows up, you'll be able to save this. So I've saved a bunch of other views here. I'm going to hit save and give this a name. This will be exploded Axon 2. Okay, so I can put my properties docket down here. And so in this exploded axon view, so I can move around, I can change the model, but then I go back to named views, and then I double click on this and it'll go back to that view. And then if I want to update it, I can center this, maybe zoom in, and I can then hit save, rename, and it'll say it exists already, just say yes, and it'll update that view. Okay, so this is pretty good. I don't like the fact that this drawing is overlapping so much, so I'm going to move the steel trusses up. Let's just move these up another 10 feet. And then I'm going to move my roof up another 10 feet as well. So going back, double clicking on that. Let's go another maybe 15 feet. Going back to this. So this is looking a little better. I can maybe go down 5 feet. Okay, so we have the roof trusses and the roof surface pulled apart. I'm going to go back to the exploded axon view that I have. Maybe zoom out. Going to save this. It overwrites that. And when I'm happy with this, we're ready to export. So I can export this as a model. There's a number of things I could do. I could select everything and do a make 2D. So I'll show you that. I'll select all the geometry and make sure it's going to grab everything that's grouped. So it wants to, I'm going to type the command remove from group because I have some extraneous grouped items out here. I'm going to select all of this. Okay. now I'm going to go back to my view, select everything, and type Make 2D. And it's important that we have a saved view when we're using Make 2D, because you may make changes to this later, and you always want to be able to go back to that same view that you set for yourself. You don't want to lose that view and have to recreate it somehow. All right, so I'm going to hit OK, and this will take a minute. This is a heavy file. So what Rhino is doing is it's taking that camera view and creating a projected drawing that's flat on the ground. And so I have already, so what it's going to do is if you've selected it, there's an option to create its own set of layers for the Make 2D. So I already have a Make 2D here, and it has, it already has some line work on it. But when I turn that on, you'll see the drawing that it just generated. And so with this, you'll notice this is that view, but it's flat. So it's just a projection of it. It's just two-dimensional line work, which can be useful. This could be brought into Illustrator or other drafting software and drawn over. This could be brought into AutoCAD for detailing work, Revit. There's a lot you can do with this. So I'm going to go into top view, and with this line work I can then select it. A little bit of cleanup first before I send it into Illustrator. I can select this, type explode, ungroup as well, and just clean up some of these edges. This was part of the model making, and you don't really need that edge. So I'm going to say ungroup, delete that. I don't need this curve, so I'm going to type ungroup. And it's good that everything has its own layer, because I can use that when I want to update line weights. Okay. One other thing we can do, and I could do this in Illustrator as well, but I'm going to create a new layer here and call this projection lines. And a projection line is going to show you that something has moved. So it'll show you the original location of the roof, and I'm going to draw a dashed line connecting it to the final location of that roof. So I'm going to give this a unique color. So when I bring it into Illustrator, I'll recognize it. And I'm going to draw a line, hold Shift to make it vertical, and notice the corner of that wall actually hits somewhere back here. So it's not, you know, that roof, it has an overhang, so it's not going to be perfectly aligned. I'm going to do the same thing. So all of my corners will get a projection line. And again, I can do this in Illustrator. It's sometimes easier just to do it in Rhino. And I'm only going to go up to where that curve would stop, because theoretically it would be behind this wall here. So I'm not going to overlap my drawing. And projection lines are useful because they're indicating kind of where the model started and where it's ending up. Okay, so I have the front corners. I'm going to get the back corner too. Okay. All right, so I have projection lines, I have the line work that I need, and everything's on its own layer. So now when I select this, type export I can then export this. Oops, I want to export it as an Illustrator file. So under here, I'm going to say Adobe Illustrator. And when you select it, everything that you just selected is going to be exported. So now when I open up Illustrator, I can go File, Open, go to my desktop, and I'll see that file. Okay. And so it's going to open an artboard based on the size of the last project you worked on. So I'm selecting this, holding Shift, and scaling it. So I want to see what this thing looks like at a larger scale. And to zoom, you hold down Alt and then use the scroll button to zoom in and out in Illustrator. Looks like, okay, yeah, we're seeing the vanity in the bathroom there. So we can now modify the line weights, we can modify the color. Obviously this is really messy, so this will take a little bit of cleanup, but there's some tools that we can use in Illustrator to make that a lot more seamless. So I can select everything, we can move it, and try to center this a little better. And some of these layers are maintained. Scene silhouette, that's kind of the perimeter line that it's creating. I don't know how necessary that's going to be in this diagram, but maybe we'll keep that around. Other curves here, so these are the visible curves. But what I want to do is start changing the line weights, start changing the line types. So for projection lines, I want all of the lines that are this color to be a dashed line and black. Okay, so there's a way to select everything that's that color. I can select it. I can go to Select, Same, Stroke Color. And that's going to grab all of the lines that are the same color. I can then set my line weight to 0.5. I want this to be thin. I can set the color to black. And if I go to the stroke tab, I can set the line to be dashed. So we like to do a smaller dash. This is 4 point, and then you can change, you know, if you want the gap to be 4 point or if you want the gap to be 6 point, you can change that. Makes it a little lighter looking. And you can modify that even further if you want to go dash dot, for example. That's all possible. Okay, so using that same method of selecting one curve, saying select, same, stroke color, you're able to modify each of these independently as long as the layer that it's on has a different color. And so you can double click on this, set this to black, and I'm going to change my line weight down to 0.25. I want that to be more thin. And so go ahead and keep doing that for the different parts of the model. If I know all of this wants to be black, I can select all of it and set the color. It varies. I'm going to set all of that to black. Okay, and I'll still have to modify the line weights. So if you want to grab everything with the same line weight, you can select one of these and say select same stroke weight. And it's going to grab everything with that stroke weight. So again, if you wanted to modify that, I can bring this down to 0.1 and it lightens everything up. I then want to go back up here. This is set to 1.4, so really massive. And I'm going to say select same stroke weight. It's going to grab everything that's that line weight. And I'm going to set this to 0.11 just to make it slightly different from the others so that I can select just that layer again, or just that set of roof trusses. Okay, so the drawing's already looking a lot better. We have the thin line weights, heavier line for the building, and we can go in and make a silhouette around this, make it even kind of more pronounced. And then here I want to select everything that's this lime green color. So I'm going to select on one edge, select same stroke color, and then I can set all of that at once to black. All right, and then I can, if I wanted to change the line weight or the stroke weight, I can do that as well. I'm going to set this to 0.22. And then these lines are still blue, so I'm going to select this, select same stroke color, and I'm going to set this to black. And yeah, I'm okay with that. Okay, so then I can grab the same thing with blue, select same stroke color. Set that to black instead. All right, and so if you have you know, a situation where you want to create a high contrast between the building and the kind of white space behind it, you can then go in and create a silhouette line. This already has one, so I'm going to select this, and it's already on its own unique layer. So what I can do is select it and just turn up the line weight. So I'm going to set this to 7, and that's going to indicate where everything is. So it's showing, you know, and this is Rhino's calculation that this is kind of the open silhouette for everything. That's too thick, obviously. So we're going to Control Z, get that back down to smaller line weights. And this drawing is starting to look good. We can also make a scene silhouette just manually. So I can create a new layer. I'm going to lock these old ones. And I'm going to use the pen tool to just go around and create a very heavy line that'll be the perimeter of the model and the white space. So anytime you have 3D model interfacing with white space, this diagram type should be covered. So I'm just working my way around the perimeter of the building. I guess I could just do this. I just hit Control Z when I make a mistake, hold Alt and then scroll for zoom. I'm just going around creating a perimeter. We'll reduce the line weight here in a second. Okay, so I just closed it. Close that pen tool command, and you saw when I dragged, it was able to create a curve. So if I'm just clicking, it makes a polyline. But then if I click and drag, it's going to make a spline or a curve. Control Z. And this is a little intense. This is very cartoon-like for that perimeter, but it's okay. I think we're close. So I'm going to select this because I made my own layer, and I'm going to set this, maybe bring it down to 2 points. So 2-point font, that's about what we're looking for as far as the kind of differentiation between the mass and the white space beyond. And we could do the same thing for the roof. So, because I also want to differentiate this from everything. So creating a new layer, I'm going to go back to the pen tool and just hit the entire perimeter, whatever edge is touching white space. That's what we want to kind of draw over. I'm going to simplify this for the sake of the diagram. Even though this is pretty accurate to what was actually built, we want to make this kind of a clear, simple diagram so that someone can understand the concept of the project and not have to know all the construction details. Oops. I'm going to close this. All right, and then I can Control and space bar, or Control and middle mouse click to zoom out, or Alt and scroll bar to zoom out. Okay, so I have decent line weight there. That's also 2 points, 2-point font. And so I have trusses. I have my roof exploded off. I have the building itself. I'm going to save this before I forget. Make this a diagram. Call this exploded axon. And so now what I could do is take the Make 2D, take this actual line work, maybe in this last one, select these, it's locked. Okay, selecting it. I'm also going to select this. Holding Control allows you to select both. And then I'm going to say Object, Live Paint, Make. So this contains artwork, complex artwork. We're okay with that. So what it's doing is it's calculating all of the gaps in the line work, and it's figuring out what's going to be enclosed, what's going to be open. So I can double click, and what I want to do Live Paint for, I want to create some surfaces. So if I hold, let's see. Oh, that's right. So it's behind the Shape Builder tool. You'll go to Live Paint, Live Paint bucket, and as soon as you click, it's going to fill in that region. Okay, so that's the Live Paint command. And if you have many panels like this that you want to do at once, just simply select and drag, and it'll fill in, kind of fill in the dots, or paint by color almost. I'm going to fill these in. Okay. And then I can also fill in the perforations as well. That was a design feature, part of the roof shell. And so now this diagram is starting to look a little bit more three-dimensional. We could make it even more 3D by changing this tone a little bit. So if I go with a slightly darker tone for maybe this portion that's in shade, it'll just give the impression that this is 3D and maybe this is being shaded. That seems to be good enough. That's kind of what we're looking for. And then maybe these south walls are going to be a little brighter. So I can double click on this, set this to be a little bit lighter, and then still go in with the live paint bucket and then set each of these. Okay, so I have my roof being pulled off the existing building. I'm going to hit save. And if I'm okay with the line weights for everything, which I'm good with, I can export this as, you know, a number of different things. Let's say I want to go a little darker or maybe a little lighter for this facade. Live paint, fill. Maybe that's the issue. It shouldn't be the facade that gets lighter. It should be the roof. So I'm going to fill in this. I don't know about that. Maybe we'll leave this as is. I can do the same thing for the actual building as well. And so, you know, depending on what diagram we want to create with this, like I may want to create another diagram out of the same view and talk about how the building gets sliced in 4 places. So that's an option as well. Maybe I colorize each one, so each one has its own kind of color associated with it, so we can clearly tell how the modules come apart. Yeah, so we can do live paint on this, or we can leave this as is. I'm okay with leaving this. So I'm just going to go to, well, first I'll go to document setup. I want to set the artboards here to portrait first. And so it's a tabloid, which is 11 by 17. So that's the size that we're looking at. So I can hit escape. So when I'm happy with this diagram, I can make sure to save it. Always save your file as an Illustrator file. And then you can save it as a PDF by going File, Save a Copy. And you can set this as a PDF. We'll call this Exploded Axon. So now this is a PDF file. I can also go to File, Export, Export As, and I can save using the artboard. So it's going to use that kind of white blank space beyond. And I'm going to export this as an exploded axon. So when I export it as a JPEG, you'll see it's pretty high resolution. I can zoom in. And you have to set the resolution manually. So if it's not coming in very high res, make sure to zoom in and always look at the line work. Make sure it's what you're looking for. Make sure the diagram makes sense. All right, so that's the portion to go from Rhino to Illustrator. And we've seen this already, and you have other videos of that. Okay, so the first part of this was going from Rhino to Illustrator to generate this exploded axonometric diagram. The next part of this is going to be going from Rhino to SketchUp. And I generally don't model in SketchUp, but in this case, we're doing this because it has some really good graphic quality with the shadow, and the hidden line views look pretty nice in SketchUp. So you'll see when we create them that it's some decent views that we get. So I'm going to go into 3D view just to look at what we're about to export. And so this will be a similar view that we just did. So I'm going to leave all of this stuff exploded. I'm just going to select this, type export once again, and then export it as a SketchUp file. So if I go up to, let's see, SketchUp, we'll find this. We'll call this exploded Axon. And so it's taking this geometry and it's exporting it into a file format that SketchUp can read. And so the roof is already pulled off. It's already exploded, so I won't have to do that work in SketchUp. So it'll make my life a little bit easier once we open up SketchUp and you see this file. And so before we exported the line work, it's just telling us how big this file is. Before we exported this two-dimensional line work into Illustrator, now we're exporting this three-dimensional geometry into SketchUp. So I'm going to open up SketchUp. This was the previous model that I was working on. I'm going to open up the new one. File open. Go to 3D. Find that file that I just exported. Okay, and now you'll see that file is now in SketchUp. So it's the same file that I was working on in Rhino. You'll notice a few things. There's a kind of back surface that's showing up as this bluish color. It's a setting in SketchUp that can be changed. So under styles here, this is the kind of view style that SketchUp is using. And you can choose from one of their presets. So there's hidden line, which I like a lot. This is a very simple line type. Now that this is in SketchUp, I can actually, well, no, it just deleted that surface. I'll probably have to get rid of those in the next software. Yeah, it's not the best at that. One thing I can do to kind of hide, let's say I don't want to see this, the foundation of the house in this diagram, I'm just going to make a plane. So first thing I'm going to do is select all of this. I'm going to group it together. So right click, make group. Now that that's one group, I can make a plane pretty easily without worrying about it attaching to any of my existing geometry. I'll select that and just make this really large plane that I'm going to use as the kind of ground plane. If I triple click it, it's going to select all of it. I'm going to right click, make that a group as well, move it. I hit the M keyboard shortcut on my keyboard. M is short for move in SketchUp, and I can move this thing into place. And I just want to create a floor for this so that my foundation is being hidden. Okay, so that's the point of that. And so just like in Rhino, I can set a view. Just like in Rhino, I can set this to be an orthographic view. So I can go to View or Camera, Parallel Projection. And in SketchUp. Again, I can set this to be what I want. Maybe make that a little bit more vertical. And when I'm happy with the view, zoom out a little. When I'm happy with this, I can go to, let's see, view, animation, add scene. And so when you add the scene, it's going to save this. So this is scene 9. So now if I were to move it around, I can always click on scene 9 and it'll take me back to that view that I've saved. Okay, so this is another way of getting kind of a hidden line drawing out of this. But what's nice about this, I can start modifying some other things like shadows here too. So if I go to Window or Tools, let's see, Shadows is on, oh, I can turn on shadows this way. And let's see. There it is, being hidden. So down here, there's, so under the default tray, there's shadows down here. And so in this, because I look at this image and I see these dark shadows, they're not really at an angle that I want. I can turn these shadows and make them lighter by doing this. So you just have to find the shadow tab. It should be under Window. You should be able to manage these trays and kind of find where the shadows thing is if it's not down here. But I can change so I'm changing the lightness, basically changing how dark these shadows show up. And you can also change the time. So throughout the day, this can change. And so this could be a really effective solar study. So if you want to tell a client where the shadows are going to be at a specific month and a specific day and specific time, you can do that. And you can calculate exactly where those shadows are going to be. In a model like this, obviously I'm pulling the roof way up there, so I don't know how much it makes sense to work with the shadows, but you could see the shadow play from morning to noon to afternoon and evening. Okay, so you can do a sun study in SketchUp relatively easily that way. So this could be an effective technique. You can change how bright the lighting is. I don't have any lighting here, but it's just the darkness that I would play with here. And that's if I wanted to do shadows. I think this particular view probably is fine without shadows. And once I'm happy with this view, I can zoom out. I'm going to go to C9 again. And when I'm ready to export, I can go File, Export, 2D Graphic. And here you want to export it as a JPEG. I can set the options to have a high quality. Right now this is 4000 by 1693, so pretty high res. And I've set this to better quality. And I'm going to put this in diagrams, call this Exploded Axon 1, and export it. So it'll take a second, and it'll create this exploded axon as a JPEG for me. So let's see. Here it is. So yeah, so that file, that image size was a lot wider. And when I zoom in, you're seeing this aliasing, this kind of jagged diagonal, which we don't want. So I'm going to change my export settings. Oops. I'm going to File, Export, 2D Graphic, and under Options, set that to 1693. And that should be 4000, but it's going to change this. For some reason it's not letting me change the proportions of that export. So what I'm going to do is just set my height to 4,000. So this will be pretty large. Let's see if this works. So this will be a little bit higher res. Okay, so here's exploded axon 2. That's 1. Here's 2. So yeah, notice when we zoom in, it's a little bit better line quality. So the larger image you go, the better line quality you'll have. So that's to export it as a JPEG. You could also, in SketchUp, you can export this actually as a line drawing as well. So I can go to File, Export, 2D Graphic, and instead of JPEG, I can set this to EPS. Now EPS can be read by Illustrator, so I can set this to actually import into Illustrator as well. So I'm going to call this an exploded axon, export. And now in Illustrator, I can open that as well. So I'm going to open that, find the EPS file that'll look like this. So it's exploded axon. It's unknown. I think maybe because it was still being generated. No.
Is EPS a vector format or
Record. So just to reiterate, EPS files weren't opening, so I went to File, Export, 2D Graphic, and exported this as a DWG, and Illustrator is able to open that file. So this is what I'm given. Very similar to what I did from Rhino. All of this is vector line work that I can now modify. It is all on the same layer, and I think that probably happened during the conversion from Rhino to SketchUp. So this can also be edited in the same way.